Welcome to my channel, Notorious Crafts. In this video, I will show you how you can make a variety of these miniature books, some that are leather cover and some that are canvas covered. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more miniature and dollhouse crafts. For the first step, I am grabbing my ruler and I'm going to measure out my paper to make sure that I will be cutting out even pages for the inside of the book. I'm using a paper cutter to get a nice clean cut for each of the strips of paper that I am cutting out. I'm using 30 strips of paper for the thicker book that I'm going to make, and for the other set of books, I'm going to use about 20 strips, and that will make the other books slightly thinner than these. Having books of many different thickness will help create a variety of books. And now I'm making sure that all of the pages are even, so I'm just using a flat surface to push up against the paper. And now I'm using some clips to hold all of the pieces of paper together before I glue them. After I had all of the strips of paper clipped in, I took some glue on the tip of my paintbrush and started brushing on the paint onto one edge of the paper, and then I let it dry overnight so that the glue can harden. All of the pieces of paper are secured in and it's slowly starting to look more like a book. I use my X-Acto knife to start cutting out pieces of the long strip into smaller pieces that will then be my book. I use the grid lines on my cutting mat to measure out the size of the book. This part did take a while to cut through many layers of paper, but eventually I was able to get a piece out and then use some sandpaper to smooth out the very rough edge of my book. I did not end up making it perfectly smooth since I did want these books to look worn and vintage-like, so I did keep some of the edges a little bit rough. This first book that I am making will be covered by leather, so first I am applying a very thin layer of glue all around the outside of the book, and I'm going to use some canvas fabric around it. Adding this piece of fabric around the paper will help keep all the pieces more secure over time. And I am keeping my brush handy to smooth out the glue so it's a nice even layer all around, and then that way none of my pieces of paper will end up being really lumpy. And I'm going to fold this last piece of fabric over and I will let this dry for a few hours. And I'm also going to seal off some of the edges so that they end up not fraying. So I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on the edges. And then I'm also going to cut off the extra fabric so that it doesn't end up sticking out. And then I will also seal that edge over with some glue. I bought this large variety pack of different leather materials at Michael's craft stores, and this is really perfect for making a good variety of book covers. There are a lot of different leathers to choose from. I'm really happy that I got this variety pack. I think I'm going to use this brown one. It has many different colors within it, and it does look like an old worn book. And now I'm just measuring it by hand to make sure that I have enough of the leather fabric to go around it. I'm using some regular scissors that I have to cut the leather. I'm not sure if there is a better tool for cutting leather. This is actually my first time using leather in any of my projects, but if you guys know what is best for leather working, let me know down below in the comments. And now I'm just adding some glue on the very top of the canvas where I will attach it to the leather. I'm wondering if fabric glue would have been the better option for this, but I guess I will find out in the long run what works best. I first started off by just adding glue to one side of the book and making sure everything was fitting properly before I added glue to the other sides. And then after all the glue was in place, I folded over the other side of my leather flap, and then I used the glue bottle to hold it down while the glue set in place. I wanted my book to look like it was a really old age book, so I mixed some water and paint together and then painted over the edge of the book to make it look a lot darker. I should have done this step much earlier on when I had put the pages together. It's still okay to do this much later on in the steps, but I'm being careful not to paint over my leather or to discolor it. Another thing that you can do is use colored paper, like a tan paper, if you want your pages to look more aged. And if you don't have colored paper, you can just age the entire sheet of paper by painting it or whatever aging method you prefer to use. The next set of books that I am going to make are going to be canvas covered, and I want to make a variety of different colored canvases, and I only have one color of fabric, so I'm going to end up painting the fabric in many different colors. The paint was bleeding through on the other side of the fabric, so I did just put a sheet of paper so that I wouldn't have a mess underneath. I also chose a lighter brown color of paint to paint my fabric. One coat of paint was enough to cover the fabric. I didn't want it too thick since I will be folding this over my paper. Fabric paint would have been the better option to paint this, but I didn't have any on hand and I didn't want to go out and buy some. I just wanted to use what I had at hand, and I already have too many craft supplies right now. I have all my fabric painted in black, a dark forest green, a light brown, and a dark brown. And now I'm ready to cut it into thinner strips. And I'm just cutting it along in between each of the paint lines. For this next set of books, I am pre-aging all of the white books using some paint and water. So all I did was just put small dabs of paint and put some water and mixed it with my brush, and then I'm just painting it over the book. And I'm making sure that the pages do not stick together while they are wet, so I just flipped through the book to make sure they're not stuck. When I put the fabric over the book that I made, the white pages were showing through on the other side of the fabric. So what I ended up doing was just painting the outside of the book black. It's a little bit hard to see on camera how the fabric looks over the book, but in natural light, I was able to see the white coming through. I think the fabric was just a little bit too thin, so painting the book a darker color solved that problem. I didn't want the raw edge over the fabric to be sticking out, and I really didn't like how it looked, so I folded over the edges of my fabric so that the raw edge would be hidden on the inside before I folded it over on the book. I also trimmed the corner where the fabric was overlapping so that it wouldn't be too thick and the fabric would not bulge when I glued it down to my book. Since every single one of my books is a different size, I ended up measuring each one by hand to make sure that the fabric was a perfect fit to each of the books, and then trimmed the excess. And then I ended up folding over the remaining raw edges of the other sides of the fabric. I also put a little bit of glue underneath each of the fabric flaps to help hold it down before I glued the fabric to the book. Fabric glue would have made this a lot easier. I ended up just using regular Elmer's glue, which ended up seeping up on the other side of the fabric. So once I'm done with all these books, I will have to repaint the outside to hide some of the glue that came up on the other side of the fabric. I then glued down the book to the fabric and kept pressing it down. I continued that same process for the remaining books. I did find it easier to first glue down one side of the book, let that dry, and then glue on the other side of the book. That way the fabric wasn't sliding around when I tried to fold the other side of the fabric. While the glue was drying, I did find it helpful to have something help hold it down, so I used my small paint bottles to hold the books in place. I just glued down one side of this book to the fabric for my light brown colored book, and I'm gonna let it dry, and I'll place my glue bottle on top to let gravity do its job while the glue dries. And I'm gonna move on to my next book. And that's just how I continued making these books one at a time, and I would let some of the glue dry for the other books, and I'd move on to the next one to help save some time while I waited for the glue to dry. If I end up doing a lot more projects using fabric, or I need fabric glue or fabric paint, I'll probably end up buying some. I didn't want to buy some because I already have so many craft supplies and I already am running out of storage. I don't know if anyone else has those problems. That's why I wanted to use what I have, but it did make some things a lot more difficult. And here's how all of my books turned out. I did end up making quite a few more using some of the leather from the variety pack, since I had a few different colors to choose from. Every single one of these books fully opens and is usable too. I did make these books look like they are aged by painting over the sides, but you do not have to do that. Let me know down below in the comments what you think about this project, or if you have any other tips for making miniature books. As always, thank you so much for watching, and see you guys in the next video.